Every day, millions of people pick up their phone for one small, specific reason, and then look up 20 minutes later wondering where the time went. That moment is not a character flaw, and it is not a failure of discipline or personal resolve. It is the predictable result of a system that is structurally easier than almost any task requiring sustained human effort. This documentary asks a single, honest question that most productivity advice never quite reaches. Why does your phone win, even when you genuinely intend to stop? You meant to check one message, maybe confirm a time or look up a single fact. But something shifted the moment your thumb unlocked the screen, and the original task quietly dissolved into something else entirely. Think about the last time that happened to you, because it almost certainly did happen, probably more than once today. The phone didn't force anything. It simply made the next tap feel more natural than putting it down. That gap between intention and action is exactly where this story lives. Attention isn't a character trait. It's a resource, and like any resource, it runs out. Your brain allocates it the way a budget gets spent. Every decision, every distraction, every open tab draws from the same account. By the time you sit down to do something that actually matters, that account is already lower than you think. Researchers call this cognitive load, and the evidence is clear that humans carry far more of it than we were ever designed to handle. What makes attention especially vulnerable is that it operates on two very different tracks. One is voluntary, the focused, deliberate kind you consciously direct toward a task you've chosen. The other is involuntary, pulled outward by anything novel, urgent, or socially charged in your environment. Your phone is engineered to live entirely on that second track, and it's very good at its job. So the struggle you feel isn't weakness. It's a structural mismatch between a finite human system and an infinite external one. Understanding that gap is where everything starts to change. You don't have to pick up your phone for it to break your concentration. It only has to signal that something is waiting. That signal, whether it's a sound, a buzz, a badge, or a banner sliding across your screen, fires a reflex your brain can't easily override. Neuroscientists call it an orienting response. Your attention snaps toward any sudden change in your environment, automatically, before you've made a conscious decision. It evolved to protect you from predators, but your phone has learned to exploit it dozens of times a day. Even when you don't unlock the screen, the interruption has already done its work. Your train of thought derails, and research suggests it takes an average of 23 minutes to fully recover that depth of focus. The notification doesn't need your permission to cost you something. The unsettling part isn't the buzz itself. It's that the phone doesn't even need to be in your hand to own a piece of your attention. Getting pulled in by a notification is one thing. Staying lost for 20 minutes is something else entirely. The feed you land on wasn't designed to have a natural exit, and that absence is not an accident. Every scroll loads another item, and every item is calibrated to feel just interesting enough to justify one more. Autoplay removes the small moment of friction where you might have chosen to stop, because that moment of friction is exactly where you would have left. Recommendation engines don't show you what you've already seen, they show you what you haven't. And your brain treats every unseen item as a potential reward worth checking. That pull toward the unknown is one of the oldest circuits in human cognition, and these systems are built to keep it firing. You've probably felt it, the sense that stopping now would mean missing something just below the surface. There's no chapter break, no credits, no natural pause that signals completion, because completion is the one state the feed is engineered to prevent. What makes that mechanism so powerful isn't the content itself. It's something deeper about how the brain responds to novelty. Your brain wasn't built for focus. It was built to notice what's new, because new things used to matter. A sound in the grass, a shift in the light, an unfamiliar face at the edge of camp. These were signals worth interrupting everything for. That instinct is still running, and your phone has learned to speak its language fluently. Every notification arrives as a small, unresolved question. What is it? Is it good? Does it matter to me? The answer is almost never urgent, but the question itself is enough to pull you away, because your brain treats uncertainty as a reason to look. What makes this harder is that the reward isn't consistent. Sometimes it's something meaningful, sometimes it's nothing. And that unpredictability is exactly what keeps the behavior alive. Psychologists call this variable reward, and it's one of the most reliable ways to make any action feel worth repeating. Most of the time, you don't decide to check your phone. The urge arrives before the decision does, and your hand is already moving. That gap between impulse and intention is where your attention quietly slips away. You don't have to touch your phone for it to cost you something. A study from the University of Texas found that simply having a phone on a desk, face down, silent, measurably reduced working memory and fluid intelligence in people trying to focus. The phone doesn't need to buzz or light up to pull cognitive resources away from whatever you're actually trying to do. The phone doesn't need to buzz or light up to pull cognitive resources away from whatever you're actually trying to do. Your brain already knows it's there, and some part of it is quietly monitoring, waiting for permission to check. That background monitoring isn't passive. It consumes real mental bandwidth, the same bandwidth you need for reading, writing, thinking, or listening to someone you love. Think about the last time you sat down to do something hard with your phone nearby. Did the work feel as deep as it should have? The phone's presence functions as an open loop your mind can't fully close until the device is out of reach. Researchers call this the brain drain effect, and it scales with how much you rely on your phone in daily life. The more central the device is to your habits, the more attention it quietly claims just by sitting in the room. And if simply seeing it carries that cost, removing every barrier to picking it up carries something far heavier. The phone doesn't ask you to prepare, travel, or wait for anything to load before it rewards you. It's already in your pocket, already on, already tuned to exactly what holds your attention longest. Every other option in that moment, a book, a conversation, a walk outside, carries some small cost of entry that your phone simply doesn't. When you're bored in a waiting room, the phone is the path that requires nothing from you. When you're stressed between tasks, it offers relief before you've even made a conscious decision to reach for it. That gap between impulse and action has been engineered down to almost zero. No delay, no effort, no friction standing between the feeling and the reward. Convenience isn't a side feature, it's the architecture. The phone is always available, always changing, and always ready with something easier than whatever you were doing before. And when something easier is always 1 inch from your hand, the question isn't why you reach for it. It's how any competing task survives at all. You're 40 minutes into a report that actually requires your full mind, and then a message arrives. It doesn't demand an answer, but your eyes move to it anyway, almost before you decide to look. That single glance costs more than the 3 seconds it takes, because the thinking you were doing doesn't pause, it dissolves. Researchers call this the resumption lag, the time your brain needs to rebuild the exact mental structure you were holding before the interruption. On average, that recovery takes more than 20 minutes for genuinely complex work. So, a morning of 6 interruptions isn't a morning with 6 small delays. It's a morning where deep focus never fully returns at all. The calendar shows 8 hours worked. The output tells a different story. What you lose isn't time on the clock. It's the rare mental state where hard problems actually get solved. And the messages keep arriving, each one resetting that 20-minute clock before the last one ever finished counting. She's got 3 chapters to read before tomorrow, and she knows exactly how long it will take. The phone sits face up on the desk, and even when it doesn't buzz, she's aware of it. A low hum of possibility at the edge of every sentence. Researchers call this the mere presence effect. A device within eyeline quietly drains the working memory you need to actually understand what you're reading. She picks it up once to check the time, and the next 17 minutes disappear into a thread she didn't mean to open. What makes this harder than it sounds is that her brain isn't broken. It's doing exactly what brains do when something unpredictable and social sits closer than her textbook. Every interrupted study session doesn't just cost her time. It costs the consolidation window where new information moves from short-term into long-term memory. That window doesn't reopen on demand. So the question isn't whether she'll remember the material, it's whether the phone has already decided that for her. There's a particular silence that falls at a dinner table when someone reaches for their phone mid-sentence. The person still talking doesn't always stop, but something shifts, something small and hard to name. It's not just distraction pulling one person away. It's the quiet signal that whatever is on that screen ranked higher than this moment. Researchers who study conversation have found that even a phone resting face down on a table changes how openly people talk to each other. The presence alone is enough to narrow what feels safe to share. And it compounds. A glance at bedtime becomes a scroll. A scroll becomes 40 minutes of blue light where sleep was supposed to live. What gets lost isn't always dramatic, and that's exactly what makes it so easy to miss. The moments that build closeness, the unhurried ones, the quiet ones, are precisely the moments that feel most replaceable in the second before you reach for your phone. The question worth sitting with is whether those moments feel replaceable after. The phone in your pocket is also the reason you found your way home in a strange city at midnight. It's the message that told you your father was out of surgery and everything was fine. It's the video call that let a grandmother watch her grandchild take a first step from 3,000 miles away. These aren't small things. They are the kinds of moments that used to require luck, proximity, or waiting by a landline for hours. The smartphone compressed distance and uncertainty in ways that genuinely changed what it means to stay connected to the people and information that matter most. It put a library, a map, a doctor's reference guide, and a direct line to everyone you love into a single object that fits in your hand. So the goal was never to throw that away. The question worth asking is whether you're the one deciding when to pick it up. There's a version of picking up your phone that begins with a decision, and a version that begins with nothing at all. The intentional version has a shape. You need directions. You're calling someone. You have a specific thing to do, and then you stop. The automatic version has no shape, no starting intention, and often no clear ending point either. Most of us assume we're in the first category far more often than we actually are. And that gap between assumption and reality is where attention quietly drains away. What makes automatic use so hard to catch is that it doesn't feel like a failure. It feels like a reflex, which is exactly what it has become. Your phone's default settings, its notification placement, and the way apps open instantly are all designed to keep that reflex alive and frictionless. Even the social expectation that you'll respond quickly trains your nervous system to treat silence as a reason to check. The boundary between intentional and automatic use isn't a matter of character. It's a matter of what your environment makes easiest by default. And the moment you can see that boundary, every time you reach for your phone, becomes a choice you can actually make. Willpower feels like the obvious solution. Decide to stop, and then just stop. But the research on self-control tells a different story, and it's one most productivity advice quietly ignores. Willpower isn't a character trait you either have or lack. It's a cognitive resource that depletes like a battery under load. Every decision you make across a day draws from the same finite reserve, and by evening, that reserve is running close to empty. That's exactly when automatic phone use is strongest, when you're tired, stressed, or mentally saturated from hours of sustained effort. The conditions that drain willpower are the same conditions that make reaching for your phone feel completely effortless and inevitable. Asking exhausted willpower to override a deeply wired automatic habit is like asking a tired muscle to lift more weight than it lifted when it was fresh. The environment around you, not the resolve inside you, is what determines which behavior wins most consistently. So the real question isn't how to want it more. It's how to build a context where the easier choice and the right choice are the same thing. The goal isn't to fight your phone harder. It's to make the fight less necessary in the first place. Every strategy that works does the same basic thing. It adds a small amount of friction between you and the distraction, and removes friction between you and the work. Putting your phone in another room isn't dramatic, but studies show it measurably improves concentration, even when the phone is silent. Turning off non-essential notifications doesn't require willpower, because the trigger that would have pulled your attention simply never fires. Grayscale mode, app timers, and scheduled communication windows all operate on the same quiet logic. They reshape your environment so the easier choice becomes the better one. You don't have to be the kind of person who locks their phone in a drawer. Even moving it out of arm's reach shifts the odds. So ask yourself, which single change would make distraction slightly harder in your specific life? And start there. The point isn't perfection. It's that your attention deserves at least as much deliberate design as the systems competing for it. None of this requires you to throw your phone into a river or live like a monk without a calendar. The goal is simpler and, honestly, more interesting than that. You're not trying to win a war against technology. You're trying to reclaim the moment when you decide what gets your focus. That distinction matters more than any app blocker or screen time report ever could. When attention becomes a choice rather than something constantly captured, the whole relationship with your phone shifts. You stop feeling managed by it and start feeling like the one doing the managing. The research on this is actually encouraging. Small structural changes, not heroic willpower, are what move the needle. A phone left in another room, a single notification turned off, a 10-minute window protected from interruption. These aren't sacrifices, they're decisions. And every decision you make about your attention is a decision about what kind of thinking you get to do. Your focus isn't gone, it's just been waiting for you to ask for it back. The phone in your pocket didn't break you, it just found every gap your attention left open. Understanding that gap is the beginning of something genuinely useful. Because awareness is the only tool that works before willpower even enters the room. The forces shaping your focus aren't invisible anymore. You've seen the architecture, the reward loops, the friction that was never accidental. And knowing the system doesn't mean you have to fight it every single day with gritted teeth and iron resolve. It means you can design your environment, your habits, and your moments of choice with something the engineers didn't account for: your own clear intention. That clarity is quieter than a notification, slower than a feed, and far more durable than any algorithm built to hold you. This film is one thread in a much larger conversation about the systems underneath ordinary life. Human Operating System explores that conversation through documentary, through writing, through every form that lets an idea breathe. Find the full world of that work at hosdocumentary.com.